She was not born into a royal family. She lacked wealth, military strength, or authority, merely an orphan raised in exile, a foreigner living under the dominion of the mightiest empire on earth. Yet her selection was not random, nor based solely on her appearance. She was placed there by divine design, concealed within the palace for a pivotal moment. Comment 1 if you've ever felt unqualified for what God called you to. Comment 2 if you believe God can use anyone, no matter their background. As kings indulged in opulence and nobles schemed behind closed doors, a silent conflict began to stir, one not waged with weapons or chariots, but with fasting faith and the courage to speak where silence might bring death. Her name was Esther. This is not merely the tale of a queen, but a narrative of how God delivered an entire people through an unexpected champion. During the reign of King Xerxes, who governed 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia, his influence reached the entire known world. From his seat in Susa, he ruled with supreme authority. To showcase his splendor, Xerxes hosted a grand banquet lasting 180 days, attended by nobles, princes, and military commanders from across the empire. Golden cups and royal wine were served without restraint. After the 6-month celebration concluded, the king invited all of Susa to a 7-day feast in the palace garden. Wine was poured generously without limitation. At the same time, Queen Vashti held a separate banquet for the women within the palace. On the 7th day, intoxicated with wine, the king proudly ordered Queen Vashti to appear before the guests adorned in her royal crown so her beauty could be displayed. Vashti declined. She refused to be showcased before an inebriated audience. The king's pride suffered. His queen had openly defied him. Infuriated and disgraced, Xerxes consulted his advisors. One counselor, Memicon, cautioned that her insubordination might set a precedent, leading all women to scorn their husbands. They advised the king to depose Vashti and issue an empire-wide decree asserting that every man should govern his household. The king concurred, and a royal order was dispatched to all provinces in every language, officially removing Vashti from her position. Yet, unbeknownst to them, the invisible hand of God had started to act. Over time, King Xerxes' anger subsided, and he reflected on Queen Vashti, her beauty, her bold stance, and the decree that exiled her. Though irreversible, her absence continued to weigh on him. Perceiving the king's mood, his counselors suggested a plan: bring beautiful young virgins from every province, subject them to beauty treatments, and let the king select a new queen. Xerxes approved the proposal. Couriers were dispatched to all 127 provinces, and young women were gathered from throughout the empire, spanning from India to Ethiopia. One of them was Hadassah, known as Esther in Persian, a young Jewish orphan brought up by her cousin Mordecai, a Jew residing in Susa. He had instilled in her reverence for God and the importance of concealing her identity in a foreign land. Esther was brought to the palace and entrusted to Haggai, the overseer of the women. She quickly distinguished herself not through demands for riches, but with humility and grace. God granted her favor in the eyes of all, especially Haggai. Over the course of 12 months, Esther underwent preparation, like the other women, for her single opportunity before the king. When her moment arrived, she presented herself with quiet dignity and strength. Xerxes was instantly captivated. The king favored Esther above all others. She earned his approval, and he crowned her, officially declaring her queen. A royal feast was organized in Esther's honor. To replace Vashti, a holiday was declared, and presents were distributed throughout the empire. Yet her Jewish heritage remained unknown. No one realized that God had strategically placed his servant in the palace, not to be served, but to act on behalf of her people. Comment 1 if you believe God positions people for purpose. Comment 2 if you're asking him to reveal your assignment in this season. Esther continued her discreet life in the royal household, faithfully adhering to Mordecai's guidance, just as she had since childhood. Meanwhile, Mordecai occupied his time at the king's gate, a central hub for civic affairs and a gathering place for royal officials and attendants. Despite lacking noble status, God had purposefully positioned him there. One day, while seated in his regular spot, Mordecai overheard a disturbing conversation. Two palace doorkeepers, Bigthan and Teresh, were speaking in secretive, resentful tones. They were conspiring to assassinate King Xerxes, a treacherous act aimed at eliminating the most powerful man on earth. Without delay, Mordecai informed Queen Esther, who had direct access to the monarch. Esther delivered the warning to Xerxes, explicitly naming Mordecai as the source. An inquiry was initiated, the incident was carefully scrutinized, and the conspiracy was confirmed. The two men were found guilty. Indeed, they had plotted against the king, and under Persian law, the penalty for treason was immediate and severe. They were executed on the gallows. Though the king's life was saved, the moment went uncelebrated. Mordecai's contribution was merely documented in the royal Book of the Chronicles, a record maintained in the king's presence. Oddly, no reward followed, no public praise, no title, just his name, quietly written into the annals of the empire. Promotional line, not paraphrase per academic focus. Eventually, King Xerxes elevated Haman the Agagite to the highest position among his officials, requiring everyone to bow before him. Yet Mordecai refused. Haman witnessed Mordecai's repeated defiance and became increasingly enraged. Upon discovering Mordecai's Jewish identity, his animosity intensified. Haman sought not only to punish Mordecai, but to annihilate the entire Jewish population across the empire. Haman cast lots called Purim to determine the date, then approached the king under false pretenses. He said, "There exists a group dispersed throughout your provinces. Their customs differ, and they disregard your laws. It is not beneficial for you to endure their presence." The king consented and handed Haman his signet ring. A decree was issued to all 127 provinces, designating the 13th day of the 12th month for the extermination of all Jews, young and old alike. As messengers disseminated the edict, Susa descended into chaos. Grief erupted among the Jews once Mordecai became aware of the decree. Mordecai tore his garments, dressed in sackcloth and ashes, and lamented loudly in the streets of Susa. Throughout the empire, Jews fasted, mourned, and wept, knowing their doom was ordained. Upon learning of Mordecai's grief, Esther dispatched a messenger to discover the reason behind his mourning. Mordecai, via the messenger, implored Esther to approach the king and intercede on behalf of her people. Esther expressed her fear in response. It was forbidden to enter the king's presence uninvited, and doing so could mean death unless he extended his golden scepter. She noted that she had not been summoned in 30 days. Mordecai's reply was courageous. He warned Esther not to assume safety within the palace. If she remained silent, help would arise elsewhere, but she and her family would perish. Perhaps, he added, she had become queen precisely for this critical moment. Esther's fear transformed into faith. She responded by instructing Mordecai to gather all Jews in Susa to fast for 3 days on her behalf. She resolved to approach the king regardless of the risk. If I perish, I perish. On the 3rd day, clothed in her royal attire, Esther bravely entered the palace's inner court. Seeing her, the king extended his golden scepter. Comment 1 if you admire Esther's courage. Comment 2 if you're praying for that same boldness in your own life. Esther approached and touched the scepter's tip with relief and hope. The king kindly inquired about her request, promising to grant it, even up to half his kingdom. Esther responded, requesting that the king and Haman attend a banquet she had prepared. Pleased and curious, the king agreed, and he and Haman attended Esther's banquet. During the meal, Esther withheld her true request, carefully watching the king to find the appropriate moment. Before the banquet concluded, Esther issued a second invitation for the next day, promising to reveal her true petition then. The king became more intrigued, while Haman's curiosity turned to anxious anticipation about Esther's eventual request. That night, King Xerxes found himself unable to sleep. Neither wine nor royal luxuries could calm his mind. Seeking distraction, he requested the royal Book of the Chronicles, which recorded the kingdom's significant events. While the scribes read, the king noticed a long overlooked entry about Mordecai, who had revealed an assassination plot and saved the king's life. Although the act was of great importance, Mordecai had received no reward. Moved by this, Xerxes asked his advisors what recognition Mordecai had received. The advisors informed him that nothing had been done. The king reflected silently, troubled by the lack of reward for such loyalty. Just then, Haman entered the palace, planning to request the king's approval to execute Mordecai on a gallows he had constructed. Before Haman could present his request, the king called him in and asked what should be done for the man the king wishes to honor. Full of pride, Haman assumed the king was referring to him and proposed an elaborate plan. He suggested the man be dressed in royal garments previously worn by the king, crowned with a royal headdress and paraded through the city on the king's horse. A noble should ride ahead proclaiming, "This is how the king honors the one he favors." The king smiled and ordered, "Do everything you've described for Mordecai, the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave nothing out." Haman went pale, his heart filled with fear. He was now compelled to bestow the honor he had envisioned for himself upon his adversary. Humiliated and resentful, Haman guided Mordecai through the city, declaring his honor exactly as he had suggested. Upon returning home, Haman was emotionally devastated. He shared all that had occurred with his wife and friends, his rage and disgrace unmistakable. His advisors and wife warned him that if Mordecai was Jewish, his defeat was inevitable, and he would certainly fall. Haman's plan to annihilate the Jews continued to escalate, but his pride had already been deeply wounded by the king's unexpected preference for Mordecai. During Esther's second banquet, she, the king, and Haman were seated again. Xerxes looked at her and repeated his question. "What is your request?" Queen Esther asked, "and it shall be granted even up to half my kingdom." With boldness and sincerity, Esther voiced her plea. "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases you, spare my life and save my people. That is my request." The king's face changed, showing surprise as Esther continued. "My people and I have been sold for destruction, death, and annihilation. Had we only been sold into slavery, I would have remained silent, for such hardship would not warrant disturbing the king." The king's expression turned grim with fury. He demanded, "Who is he, and where is the man who would dare commit such a crime?" Esther identified Haman and said, "The adversary and enemy is this evil man Haman." Overcome with rage, King Xerxes left the banquet room to calm down. Meanwhile, Haman was gripped with fear. Realizing the king's fury and that his plan was uncovered, Haman desperately begged Esther for mercy. He collapsed on the couch where she was reclining, frantically pleading for his life. Just then Xerxes re-entered and saw Haman grasping Esther. He exclaimed, "Will he even violate the queen while I am in the house?" Immediately, the king's guards seized Haman and led him away to be executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. In an instant, the wicked scheme was reversed and justice was accomplished. Following Haman's execution, King Xerxes granted all of Haman's property to Queen Esther, who then assigned Mordecai to oversee it. Xerxes also took back the signet ring he had given Haman and placed it on Mordecai's hand, bestowing upon him royal power. Yet the threat persisted. Haman's decree was still in force, as Persian law dictated that a royal edict sealed with the king's ring was irrevocable even by the king. The date of the planned massacre of the Jews, the 13th day of the 12th month, remained fixed on the calendar. Once more, Esther approached the king, this time to plead not for herself, but for the survival of her people. She begged, "How can I endure witnessing calamity fall upon my people?" King Xerxes authorized a new edict to be issued, one that would counteract the previous decree. Mordecai promptly gathered the royal scribes and drafted a new decree in the king's name. It granted Jews across every city the right to gather, defend themselves, destroy any attackers, and seize their property if necessary. The new edict was quickly dispatched to all 127 provinces in every local language, sealed with the king's ring. As the proclamation circulated, hope was restored. Grief gave way to joy and celebration. When the designated day arrived, the Jews, now united and protected by royal decree, faced their enemies with renewed bravery and prevailed. In Susa alone, 800 of their enemies were defeated, including Haman's 10 sons, known for supporting their father's evil plot. At Esther's request, they were also hanged. Esther requested an additional day of defense in Susa, and the king approved. Throughout the empire, 75,000 enemies were slain. However, the Jews refrained from seizing any plunder. Their struggle was one of self-defense, not material gain. It was a day marked by justice, not greed. After the conflict ended, the people rested. What was once a day of impending doom transformed into one of triumph and joy. To commemorate their salvation, the Jews instituted an annual festival called Purim, named after the lots Haman had cast to schedule their destruction, now a symbol of divine reversal. Each year on the 14th and 15th of Adar, they celebrated with feasting, rejoicing, exchanging gifts, and offering charity to the poor. A day once destined for death was transformed into one of life. Mordecai was celebrated across the empire, adorned in royal blue and white garments, ranking second only to King Xerxes. Yet it wasn't Mordecai's authority that made him noble, it was his character. He pursued the well-being of his people and advocated peace and truth. Even though God's name is absent from the Book of Esther, his presence is evident in every event, risk, and act of deliverance. What was intended for ruin, God transformed into deliverance. The account of Esther teaches that even in God's silence, he is ever present, and even in adversity, he is actively working. Perhaps your place and moment are also divinely appointed, not by chance or obscurity, but by purposeful selection and calling. For the same God who transformed a nation's fate continues to craft stories of redemption, even yours could be among them. If you haven't subscribed yet, please don't forget to do so. It really helps us continue providing you with amazing videos like this.